When you walk into the lecture and you're feeling kind of tense, but that's the Cerf talking about world intelligence.
We have the theme song that I always make for the particular session. And today we have a packed session. Learning the lessons from last time, I'm going to actually start the session with talking about the predictions we got correct and incorrect from the last time. And then we're going to dive into some of the updates on the business, the policy, legal changes in AI regulation, and some of the geopolitics, and ultimately we're going to talk about the winners and losers of the last couple of months, and maybe if we have time, some of the academic papers. As always, all of the slides are going to be available for you, so if you want to dive deeper into any of them and read more about what we have in mind, it's all going to be there for you right away. Some updates on our end. By now we have almost 720 students who took the AI program, so gradually we're going to have more and more people joining these sessions. The last time we ran the program, we had a person sit in the back and basically log everything. So we have a book coming out next week. It summarizes everything we teach in the program. We call it ROAI. And we also start, as of January 13, a monthly AMA, which is Ask Me Anything. You can just send any questions you want in advance. And we basically have an hour and a half when we get together. People can join, and we just answer any questions you have about things that happen. We hope that by then we have about nearly 900 participants who have taken the AI program. So we're gonna start. I see that everyone has a hard time hearing me. Let me change the. Anything? Is it better now? Is the sound better now?
Yes, it's better.
Great. Okay. I hope it's going to be, let me know if I need to change something. So I said that we have a book coming out. We now have a monthly, monthly Ask Me Anything, where people can just join and ask any question they want about AI. And we are developing with an AI company, a digital twin, basically that learns all the content that was discussed in all the classes. And it's going to basically create an AI angel that you can chat with and ask it questions about AI. And as long as it was something that was discussed in the content, you can basically talk to it and ask it questions. And it's going to be the aggregate of all the speakers and all the participants answering questions. Let's go straight into the predictions from before. So we had a lot of predictions last time about what we think is going to happen in the next 3 months, as in up to today. And we got a few right, a few wrong. Let me see right away. So one thing we spoke about, and we said that the NVIDIA stock is going to keep rising as they release more and more updates to their CUDA language. And boy, we got this one right. NVIDIA, as of last week, is the #1 company in terms of market share, and so in terms of valuation in the world. It just came from #3 a few months ago to #1, beating Apple as of last week. So that's it. There's nowhere higher to go. We can only predict that they're going to stay there for a while, but that's it. #1 company. We thought about the AI legislation that are going to try to pass in California, and we said it's going to be vetoed, and indeed it was vetoed. We're going to talk about it a little bit later, but the bottom line was that California tried to replicate the regulation that the European Union wanted to enact that tries to kind of put some kind of guardrails around the AI, only that in California, the law that tried to pass was clearly written by people who had an agenda, as in it mostly try to regulate companies that make over $100 million from AI, that are startups and not public, and that are located fully in California. This basically is N equal 1. It basically was a law that was written by the team from XAI as a way to stop OpenAI from running a riot. So Governor Newsom recognized right away that this is not a generic regulation, but it's really targeting only OpenAI, and said that he wants a different bill that actually would be regulating AI. It was vetoed. We spoke about a fight between OpenAI and itself and founders, and between OpenAI and Microsoft. And both of those happened. The CTO of OpenAI, who was on the Green Mile since he basically became the CEO for a few days when Sam Altman was ousted from OpenAI, now that he's back, after a few months, she decided to resign. At least that we were told she resigned, and she is taking time to decide what she wants to do next. That's the last one of the people who were involved, so to speak, in basically firing the former CEO and the current CEO. And I think that now we're basically with an entire fresh new board and fresh new C-suite. She was the last one. We said that's going to be a breakdown, and indeed this happened. We also predicted there's going to be a clash between Microsoft and OpenAI after a very rosy partnership for nearly 2 years. It's not a big clash yet, but for the first time, we're going to mention that again as well. OpenAI chose to partner also with other companies, namely with Google, on some of its development, and Microsoft was not happy, and this started with some souring of the relationship. In the news, we read a lot about like the meetings that were canceled and nasty emails between them. No lawsuits or something bigger than that, but that's already on the menu. We spoke about embodiment, building robots as the biggest endeavor. OpenAI, if you remember, just 3 months ago was trying to raise $1 trillion to both build a fabrication lab for their AI as well as an endeavor to build robotics. They didn't get the kind of money raise that they tried to get to, but they got quite a few billions of dollars, and they invested much of it in partnering with companies, namely a German company called Neuro Robotics, to start building their own robot AI. And they also have this big investment in a company called Figure, that is the one that they kind of flag in all of their efforts, showing that they're trying to build embodiment as in robots that will also be able to speak with OpenAI's GPT inside. Intel and AMD were the losers of the last session. We said that they're basically out, and we said that at least one of them is going to come back. I actually thought it would be Intel that comes back, but Intel is still trailing on everything that has to do with GPUs. AMD had a big comeback. AMD, the second largest manufacturer of chips, is now back with developing their own tensor processing unit parallel to the GPU from NVIDIA, and they make a lot of money. Their stock rose 4%, and they got a partnership with OpenAI that kind of tries to also compete with NVIDIA. So they have a big comeback. We spoke about the academic research that is really popular right now and seem to soon will be leaking into the production world of small language models, basically trying to take language models that aren't as big and massive as the ones that we all know about, that take months and millions of dollars to train. Academics are already writing a lot of papers about this, but it didn't really turn into any product in development. Well, now we have Google for the first time and Meta for the second time trying to actually create those things. Meta actually, I think, spearheads this thing because they also released a small language model publicly as open source. So two companies basically adopted the research and now make it into something that is viable. We're gonna see all kinds of copyright trials that will set precedents, namely the one that is kind of ongoing between OpenAI and Elon Musk, that again moves slowly in the courts and just now moved to another step where they were asked to disclose all of their data that they got without copyright licenses. And essentially every time they disclose something more, there's more lawsuits emerging from this partnership in between OpenAI and companies that before that they stole their data. We said that there's going to be a major scientific discovery related to AI. I don't know if we got it right fully, but I'll say that I think we got it in a way that I didn't predict, which is 3 of the Nobel Prizes were awarded this October to companies were basically, sorry, to individuals who were basically attached to companies that had to do with AI. So essentially DeepMind received 2 Nobel Prizes. They were awarded to Demis Hassabis, the CEO of DeepMind, but essentially it was awarded to a company that created way to essentially fold proteins better than any human could do before. I thought it's going to be academic papers coming with AI in them as the main author, and this didn't happen. But giving a Nobel Prize to a company whose product is basically an AI model that folds proteins, I think qualifies as a major scientific discovery related to AI. We said that Apple Intelligence, who was delayed again and again, still wouldn't take off. And I think it's safe to say that even though they did release the Apple Intelligence a few weeks ago in iOS and 18, I don't think we hear a lot about news about that. And they still release it in a beta version. So it's still not as glamorous and kind of popular as you may think. Not a lot of news about Apple Intelligence thus far. If you remember, just a few days before our last update, Elon Musk tweeted a deepfake movie of Kamala Harris that essentially got a lot of attention, and he then took it down and said it was a mistake and it was a joke, and that the Harris campaign basically threatened him that this is crossing some boundary. It seemed back then, it was around August 15 when it happened, that it could be developing into a big story. We said that it won't be a big story and that Elon Musk would not pay any kind of real price for that. Not only did not pay any price, this story entirely died back then, but it actually became a part of the Trump campaign later on to show that like there shouldn't be any regulation of tweets and so on. We mentioned a few companies that developed hardware for AI, Necklace AI, Yume AI, Rabbit AI, and I said that while they get a lot of attention back then, again in the summer, none of them will be real big product, and I think it's safe to say that none of them became a big product thus far. Llama, Meta's open source language model, was released just a few days before our last meeting, and it's supposed to be safer. We said it's going to be jailbroken. It took 1 week for it to be jailbroken entirely. And at the same time, we also released the AI Studio, which was supposed to be a tool that people would use in WhatsApp and Instagram to basically write comments and things for their Meta systems. It didn't take off, and I think we said the same. Seems like a lot of things that we said are right, but on the wrong, there are much more carrying weight ones. I predicted that this election in the US will be the AI election, as in that some deep fake day before the election will tip the election, that a day after the election, one of the campaigns, the losing campaign, will blame AI for being responsible, that a massive amount of bots will be responsible for misinformation. Turns out almost none of that happened. Yes, there were a lot of Russian bots trying to kind of create content in American election media. There were some things that were picked up by the mainstream media, but this was a very minor thing. AI was not a big player. Some entity that looks at kind of the amount of impact that AI had on the election suggested that it had nearly zero impact. It's a bit of a reminder to the 2016 election where people thought that Facebook and kind of all kinds of like social media targeting was really critical. After lots of evaluation of that, it seems that we can't really kind of pin down any big kind of outcome that was clearly the outcome of like this kind of targeting campaigns. I think AI seemingly, at least in the last election, at least now 2 weeks after, did not play any big role. This is a big mistake of mine on being sure it was the most important thing that's going to talk about today, and it's not at all news. Also, we said that given all of the incestuous relationship between the companies where Microsoft owns almost half of OpenAI, but also owns part of Inflection and also invests in Salesforce that has in its own shares in Mistral, that all of this incest is going to lead the Department of Justice to finally sue one or many of those big companies and basically try to break them because of all this incestuous data sharing and kind of partnership. So far, none of that happened. A lot of threats, a lot of kind of statements about this is not okay, but no real problem. And it seems that with the new administration, this is even less likely to happen. So those are the biggest predictions that we got wrong that I was sure are going to be big. We said that there's going to be a major crime event that will be attributed to AI. None of that happened so far. I said that there's going to be a best-selling book written by AI. None of that. Adobe, which seemed to have been one of the leaders a few months ago of text-to-image and text-to-video, so far is not making any progress. XAI, that I thought by now would be a big player, is still an insignificant player in the space of AI. We thought that China, with 4 companies that basically dominate the text-to-video space, will compete and will become big player. So far, we don't hear a lot of like that from China. I said that neural implants will have a big kind of a rise towards the year 2025 with Neuralink spearheading that, and we're going to start hearing about basically people putting AI in neural implants for patients and as a way to get to anyone having neural implants. None of that has happened. There's something called organic processing. People basically using biological chip to process things faster. This is something that is research-wise very, very kind of big. None of that is still in the commercial world as much. I thought that we're going to hear a lot about companies becoming service companies for AI, auditing for AI, accounting for AI. Companies basically start to be secondary market for AI. I thought it will be a big industry. So far, it's not a big industry as of yet. We thought that there's going to be a chief AI officer in most of the big companies. We're going to start hearing their names. We're going to start knowing who they are. So far, not happening. Interface with Neuralink is not on the market yet. Midjourney, one of the leading companies on text-to-image, still exists on Discord, which makes it very, very hard to kind of play if you're not an expert on Discord, which is this kind of mini Twitter-like, say, website for creating accounts. This is a big barrier for people who are not savvy in Discord, and I thought that they would have to leave Discord and go to just a mainstream software to become more popular. Apparently, they're not moving, and actually, they're even rewarding other people who join Discord. So definitely not going there. And I said that there's going to be a four-way race between four companies, two Americans, two Chinese, Hyper and Kling. So far, Sora is still the only one that we hear about in the news when it comes to text to video. I don't know if it's a good or bad track record, but I would say that I basically for the next 3 months took at least several of the previous predictions and said I still gamble on those being the ones that we're going to see in the next 3 months. So I just pulled the ones that I thought will happen, put them in the predictions for the coming 3 months. And we're going to make a few more predictions as we go along. And this is a quick chance to run through the business updates. So what happened in business in the last 3 months? Company by company, we're going to go over the leading ones. So clearly, OpenAI, the biggest player still, introduced a new big product, the Search GPT. Search GPT is a direct competitor for Google and for other search engines that use AI. Perplexity is the leader in that space. What they do basically is integrate it into GPT. So now when you ask GPT a question about current news, as in if you ask GPT who won the election last week, it automatically uses an algorithm called mixture of expert that basically says this is something that's not in my data set, but it's a question that I can find the answer for if I just Google myself on the internet. And GPT knows how to basically open a browser on the back end, ask one of the search engines what is or who was the winner of the news, get the answer, wrap it nicely in a GPT-like prompt, and give it back to you. So you can basically ask GPT questions about current event and get an answer. It won't give you any more the answer. Sorry, I can't tell you anything about world event after August 2024 because they're not in my data set. Now they can answer things from yesterday. This is a big player in the search engine and a big threat to Google. It's potentially the biggest also competitor to XAI. Elon Musk's big gamble on AI is that he can use Twitter data to train his own AI and know things about events that happened a few minutes ago. And this would be his advantage on all the other companies that he's the only one who has this data and can answer questions that are very, very kind of immediate. Now, ChatGPT can just ask with Twitter and wrap that in a prompt and give you answers as much. So this is a big update on kind of the GPT space. One of the things that leaked a few days ago was that they actually use Bing as their search engine of choice to ask questions, which again, if we take my prediction that there's going to be some crackdown on the partnership between Microsoft and OpenAI, this would be another argument there that, look, they're actually using the same search engine to give answers, not any other engine. So this will be one more parameter. Another thing about OpenAI, they recently bought for $10 million the domain name chat.com. Seems like they're trying to kind of own the space and basically put their chat GPT on a more kind of friendly looking domain. So it will be not part of like the ChatGPT OpenAI website, but for chat.com, which will make it a little bit more mainstream. This will be kind of how they treat their product. On the hardware side, OpenAI not ended its partnership with NVIDIA, but essentially decided that it's going to start using more GPUs from other companies, and they namely chose AMD as the chip partner for the coming 3 months. They also partner with Broadcom that manufactures the ASIC processor chips towards building their own GPU by 2027 for inferences. So essentially, OpenAI, this is what they raised their money in the last quarter, is trying to also become a hardware company that builds their own GPUs so they can basically not pay millions of dollars to NVIDIA or to AMD in this case, so they can build their training models, but do it at home. Again, they tried to raise $1 trillion to build an entire fabrication lab so they will actually not just be AMD, but they also build Broadcom, so they can actually manufacture the chip locally. The Biden administration supported that heavily because they wanted to move from Taiwan all of the manufacturing to the US. This turns out to be a very expensive and very difficult endeavor. Just to give an intuition, it took Taiwan about 50 years to develop the fabrication houses that work really, really well. When you try to replicate that and just build a fabrication lab in California, in this case, a lot of things don't work. It turns out that the dust or the temperature or the climate in the air is really critical. And if you don't have it perfect right, then the nano fabrication doesn't work. So much so that the only fabrication lab that's being built right now in the US by Elon Musk is one where they try to actually paint the toilet in the same color as Taiwan. They try to replicate exactly the same materials that they build the walls. They basically try to do it one-to-one in the hopes that this allows the US to actually have its own micro fabrication lab that will change the dynamics of who manufactures the hardware. With this partnership between AMD and Broadcom and OpenAI, the stocks of both of them jump between 3 to 5%. So it's a big kind of a thing for those companies. At the same time, we predict it's going to be a big kind of a decline of the partnership between NVIDIA and OpenAI. If you remember, Jensen Huang delivered himself the first H100 server, the GPU that they built in the recent model. He personally came to OpenAI and delivered the first one. There was a big picture of the president, the CEO, and Jensen from kind of taking picture with the server. This was a glamorous moment. Everyone endorsed this thing. No longer the case. And if you remember from our program, we said that it's one thing to build the GPUs, but you actually have to have a language that speaks from software to hardware. This language is called CUDA for NVIDIA, and partially people all use NVIDIA because CUDA is a very friendly language, and AMD and Intel don't have this language. They don't have a way to interface. You actually have to write in assembly, which is very, very difficult for programmers. AMD will probably release a CUDA-like language for their own, which allows basically more people to interact with their hardware. Finally, OpenAI released recently something they called Simple QA, which is a benchmark to assess the effectivity of language models. Essentially, everyone now writes language models, but the question you ask is kind of whose is bigger and whose is better. And OpenAI created an academic paper that they call Simple QA, where they basically said, here's a bunch of tests that any language model can try, and if it passes that, it's getting a higher score based on kind of how good they perform. ChatGPT isn't getting 100%, to be clear. They're very kind of fair in this thing, only that they basically introduce three things. When you ask a question of the GPT, it can either say, here's my answer, it can say, I don't know, or it can say, I choose not to answer because I think I can't attempt this thing. What they show is that their version is much more correct, much more incorrect, and very little times says, I don't know. Basically, this is evidence that they try to hallucinate a lot more than they try to not hallucinate. And they actually fairly say that Claude, their biggest competitor from Anthropic, many times says, I'm not going to attempt this thing because I know I cannot answer it right. We think Anthropic, the competitor of OpenAI, is immediately going to respond with creating their own benchmark that favors them. And in a way, we'll try to argue why their way of answering question is better. Moving to Anthropic right away, Anthropic released a new feature to their kind of GPT Claude that now can write JavaScript. You can ask questions like, how would you create a code that does this and that? And it creates the JavaScript code, but you can also ask it to run it. So you can say, don't just kind of give me a code and I'm going to copy it into my language kind of programming and try it and see it. I want you to try it yourself. And then this trying yourself basically means that they have a sandbox that you can actually have them write code and run this code and tells you, yeah, this code runs. Or this is the code that I'm running and it gives me this bug. And this is another sanity check. It's there basically respond to what GPT calls reasoning. You don't just kind of give me an answer. You also try to test the answer by seeing if it gets verified in different ways. In this case, if it runs work well. And this is another kind of level of competition in the code space, which is one of the biggest markets for those chat engines. Apple Intelligent, as I said, released its beta version. It does things in the background. There's no app for that. You can't chat with Apple Intelligence, but you can start writing text in email and it gives you adjustments to the text. You can take an image and it immediately offers you to clean it up in kind of some of their platforms. They have something called Genmoji. You can kind of in words say, I want an emoji that looks this and that, and it creates it. I think in the next 3 months, they're still going to not be a big player. They're doing it very, very slowly and very, very carefully, trying to really release feature by feature and not like a big kind of language model. And in that sense, they're doing it in a very safe way, very much in line with Apple's style, but still makes them not a big player. Microsoft released a big thing, which is the GitHub Copilot. GitHub is the library where many of the codes that most programmers use sit. Copilot, Microsoft GPT, is now using GitHub, but it actually supports in the Microsoft Copilot version running prompts on Anthropic, on Google Gemini, or on OpenAI. So essentially, they want many people to start using Copilot, and they offer you a wrapper where you basically, if you want to write codes on Copilot, you can say write the code, but use OpenAI GPT to write this code under Copilot. This is a new business model. It basically says every ChatGPT can take other GPT and put it inside. It's no longer like Copilot separate from OpenAI's or Anthropic separate from Copilot. And this might say that there's going to be a new way to compete, which is commoditizing LLMs. People are basically going to try to charge each other for using their LLMs. So if Microsoft uses a prompt rather than a user uses a prompt, they're going to pay different prices. we'll see if it's going to be a big market, but it's a new thing that changes a little bit the game. And we think that this is a way for Microsoft to decrease the chances that the Department of Justice is going to actually crack down on them, right? If they say we're not a monopoly, we're actually letting in our software everyone use anything else, it might be a way to minimize the chances of them being basically broken down by someone. Meta still its own entity in this game because they released their language model for free in open source. They struck a deal recently with Reuters, one of the biggest real-time news. Essentially, almost every breaking news that happens outside of like the mainstream news comes from Reuters. They have the most reporters all over the world. Meta now gets direct news from Reuters, which allows them to essentially curate news in Facebook and Instagram. This is a bit of a challenge to Section 230, which is the kind of section that everyone talks about right now with regards to content moderation. On the one hand, they pay for content through Reuters, but then they also fight companies who ask to compensate for content on Meta. So there's this kind of, they hold both ends. On the one hand, they say, yeah, people should pay for content, but if you put content on our website, it's your problem. It's not our problem. Kind of a dichotomy here that made at least the Canadian government immediately say, no, you cannot do it. And Canada now kind of related, so you cannot actually get news on Meta at all. This is a kind of interesting thing. And in a way, the current administration, which has a lot of reasons to have clashes with Meta's kind of C-suite governance after they removed Trump from their platform, might use this opportunity to actually start cracking down on Meta. They also released the notebook LLM called Notebook Llama, which is similar to the Google notebook. If you remember, it's something that basically you can take a PDF, upload it, and then the software learns how the PDF works, and you can ask questions about your own PDF. Only that they released it for free, so anyone can now download it and make it into a product. Again, it's open source, everyone can use it. And they also released it to what we call quantized models, and that's an interesting thing I mentioned earlier. It's an open source language model that is broken to a lot less parameters. Instead of having 175 billion parameters like most language models, this one allows you to actually break the model into small language models with only 4 billion parameters. So you can run it on phone, you can run it on a laptop. It kind of introduces a different way to think of language model. It's not like a large thing, but a small thing that anyone can run on a little platform on their own. Uses a lot less memory. And it also conceptually requires a different training. So if you train your model on the 175 billion parameters, but then you just break it afterwards, it's not working anymore. Like you have to train on whatever you test afterwards. So they basically introduced also a quantized aware training where you can actually train on your own small data and then use it. I'm kind of hand waving a little bit of how I explained it, but like that's a big leap of technological advance with regards to Meta that allows people to start taking language model and using them on smaller machines, which is their approach to saying, hey, we're going to beat all the big ones by allowing small companies to build their own language models. If Meta wins this effort, they're going to be actually a much larger player because they're going to take away they're going to eat the cake from all the Googles and OpenAI and Microsoft who try to say, no, you can't build your own. You have to use ours and pay us some royalties for using our system. Meta says we're not going to make money out of that, but we're going to make sure that the others don't make money as well. XAI, still not a player that we know about, but we know that they're in the background making their efforts to become a big player. That's his Elon Musk effort. They raised $6 more billion of dollars under a valuation of $4 billion to get to buy 200,000 GPUs. This will make them the largest owners of GPU. OpenAI has 100,000, and that's regarded a lot of GPUs. They're going to try to get $200,000 GPUs. So essentially, they're going to be able to create language models much faster, as in even if daily. So even every day, you're going to have updated language model, and presumably in a way clever or much bigger language models. One of the things that came up in an interview with the CEO of NVIDIA, who sells them those GPUs, is that normally it takes about a year for a company that gets a GPU to put it to use, and XAI was able to reduce this time to 122 days. So essentially 3 months after they get a GPU, it's already in production, which means that they're doing something right on taking the hardware and putting it to use. We know that they have a factory in Memphis where those GPUs are put to use. This is where they're doing the effort. We know that because Elon Musk himself had to go to the city council of Memphis to ask to open a factory there because it's going to take 10% of Memphis's energy. It was approved, so now 10% of the energy from Memphis, the big city in the US, is going to XAI's inference and training models. A few months ago, I would have told you that it is probably gonna raise some flags for the regulators, and they're gonna say, "Wait, we climate-wise giving a city's level of energy to one company. I think with the new administration, this won't be an issue, and I think that XAI will get to be a big player in the next 3 months because of this ability." NVIDIA was not allowed to sell a server called Blackwell GPU to China. This is one of the bans that the US said they cannot sell the most recent one, but they're preparing to sell 5 versions down. So H100 is the most recent one. They're now trying to get the previous version one, Blackwell, to China. They found a loophole there, which is apparently the US said you can sell the GPU. It just can't sit on the same motherboard that makes it go fast in terms of memory. So they're now selling it without the motherboard, as in you get the CPU and you have to develop the memory communication yourself. It's a little loophole that kind of almost like play games with the Department of Justice or with the US Commerce Department, sorry, because they meant you can't sell GPUs to China, and NVIDIA created basically a version that you can sell to China, which means that I think that there's going to be some clash between the US Commerce Department in the next 10 weeks before the administration ends its term and NVIDIA on this thing. Midjourney, I mentioned earlier that I thought they're making a mistake on basically keeping the interface to their program through Discord, which is a very kind of clunky interface. Not only are they doubling down on that, they now released a new feature. And you think, okay, if they have a new feature that's really, really great, they would make it accessible to everyone. It's the opposite. They released a new feature that allows you to basically update pictures. So you can take a picture, existing picture, and you say, add a crown to the person. It just adds a nice crown, but it looks like it's part of the picture. Or you can say, take this person, but change the color of their face. So you can take an existing picture and just change feature, which is something that everyone wants to do. It's very, very hard to do, and they are the first to release that. But you only can use it if you are a user of Midjourney that already created 10,000 images in the last 12 months. That's a strange marketing approach. It says only really loyal customers get to use this beta function, but it seems to be how they go about that. A new player from China called WeCraft tries to offer the same product for free on their website, might be a new competitor. On the small and less known companies, I mentioned 2. A company called 11 Labs, less known, released a product called the Voice Design, which allows you to basically take text and ask for it to be read in a voice of your choice, and you can describe the voice in words. It's a bit hard to do it, but you can say, read this text in the voice of a serious newscaster who is professional, and it will create a voice for you. Or you can say a female who is right now in a good mood, but gets a little bit less happy when she reads this sentence, and it will know how to change this thing. So it allows you to prompt the voice of the text that you then will have the kind of machine interact with. This was already jailbroken, and you can easily now ask it to basically create voices that are not allowed. So right now, if you ask it to make, if you tweet a text in the voice of President Obama, it will say, sorry, I cannot take existing people and make their voice. But as a test, someone took the first paragraph of Obama's Wikipedia and put that and said, create a text in the voice of a person who was born in this country and looks like this and did this thing and so on. And it creates a perfect Obama-like interaction. So this is a new tool that's popular right now. On the embodied world of companies that basically build these devices that are physical, we have another player, Physical Intelligence. I put 2 videos of their products here. Basically, another, now, I don't know how many, 10 robotics company that is trying to offer the next version of the AI, which is now you take the whatever AI you prefer, ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, or Anthropic, and so on. You put it in a robot, and the robot knows how to do stuff. They call it a robot brain. They say that they're like a GPT-1 with body. So they say that they're very far behind on the language model, but that they're ahead in the robotics. If you still believe my prediction that robotics is going to be the biggest gamble of the next year, where all the companies are going to move from chat in a window to an actual device, then this is another player that we should care about. And it also has a nice kind of ability to generalize. You can teach it how to fold one shirt and then say, now fold all the shirts, or now fold shirts and pants, and it can do that. It can do laundry. You can see in the video. So really nice thing. They also got $400 million from Jeff Bezos, which immediately raised a lot of interest in their product from the world. And still in the technology hardware space, Waymo, the self-driving car company, raised $5.6 billion from Alphabet recently, their parent company, not surprising. And they now aim to have 150 paid robo rides a week, namely in California and Arizona, which puts them in a kind of category that actually looks like a regular Uber car company. Okay, on the policy side, one of the agencies that I didn't know much about before I read this news, the Bureau of Industry and Security, put a proposal for air regulation. We don't hear a lot about those. They have a regulation. It's a proposal. Who knows if it's going to pass? Or who knows if it's going to be adopted by the new administration? But it mandates that air companies will be required to report quarterly to the government on their training models and on progress that they do, very similar to the European Act. It says that the Bureau can ask, following the updates, for some clarification, and the companies will have to report within 7 days. The answer to this thing, it actually enforces export controls on what can companies export to other countries, and it comes out as an executive order. So they suggest that Biden will enact it in the last 10 weeks of his presidency. Executive order means that it's going to be canceled immediately if Trump doesn't like it, but that's a real proposal from an organization that seemed to have worked on it for quite a while before. They're going to speak in a few minutes to Gary Marcus, and he's going to weigh on this possibility. Anthropic released a paper, academic paper, titled "The Case for Targeted Regulation," and they basically say, we, like other companies, think that regulation is a necessary thing. We think that it needs to be done within the next year and a half. And they pose a real risk that I think would emerge in the US if it doesn't happen, including risks that are in the space of like global wars, like nuclear war, chemical war, or biological weapons. So they have a really kind of gloomy approach to how bad it could be in a year and a half if no one actually steps in. I mentioned earlier, in California, they tried to pass the AI Act, and it was vetoed by the governor, who I think correctly recognized that it's not really a regulation that will tame Silicon Valley, to use Professor Marcus's term, but actually something that will focus on single company OpenAI and regulate them. Okay, the US, for the first time, also started to kind of crack down on OpenAI. They reminded OpenAI that in a hearing that happened a few months ago where Gary was a participant, OpenAI said that they're committing 20% of the resources to ensure security, and the government said, we want to see that you actually did that. It seemed like a good kind of statement to say, but we didn't see any evidence for that. So they are required to answer that. And based on the read that I have, that Elon Musk is going to take a big part in the coming administration, and he is not a fan of OpenAI, this might be a lens for him to kind of start attacking them. On the legal side, OpenAI released a few days ago one of their first, they've worked in a few of them, what they call a watermarking tool for ChatGPT. Basically, you ask ChatGPT a question, you get an answer, but if your professor wants to know afterwards if you wrote this text yourself, or if OpenAI ChatGPT wrote this thing, they can ask the question, OpenAI would know, because, I don't know, maybe every 120 letter, there's going to be the letter A. They're going to make sure that whatever happens is the letter A appears in every 120 letters, and only they would know what the watermark is, but you can actually ask them and says, is this original or was written by you? And it will be able to tell you that. So that's a way for them to essentially help people kind of start knowing on content if this content is OpenAI related or not. On the geopolitics front, finally, I think we're making good progress and good timing today. China. We just learned this week that China uses Meta AI, version 3.0. In the US, Meta released already version 3.2, but apparently China got access, like everyone else, it's open source, to a Meta AI version 3.0, Llama 3.0, and they use that to a lot of the companies. So this raised a lot of questions on whether or not the idea of open source AI language model is a good idea or not. Remember, Meta had this idea that they're going to release their language model for free to anyone, and China took a hold of that, and they're using it right now to create companies, like Chatbit is one company that they use to compete with ChatGPT. It was in the article said that they're using it for airborne drones, for domestic policing, basically making decisions and using data processing for cameras in the street about people. A lot of things that that the US does not like about Chinese kind of approach to governance. it actually violates Llama's usage policy. If you download the open source, you sign up that you won't use it for those particular reasons. Seems like the Chinese government did not really care about the usage policy. It started a conversation in the administration on whether there should be a problem with that, like whether they should prohibit companies from giving the open source to the world as is. But this is kind of counterbalanced by the NSA just declaring that they are using Meta's version 3.2, the most recent one, for their services. So a little bit of both kind of ends on this thing. Still on China, it was reported in the New York Times a few months ago actually by now, that even though there's a ban on China getting GPUs from NVIDIA, they're able to get a hold on many of them. So it's not really hard for them to get it. Last thing on geopolitics, Saudi Arabia, who right now is not a big player in the AI space, just allocated $40 billion to push artificial intelligence in their region. It's not a big number compared to the hundreds of billions that are spent in Silicon Valley right now, but it means that we might hear soon about another kind of entity that is a player in the OpenAI space. Again, if you think about it in geopolitics, in the interest of the government, of the current administration, partnering with the Middle East more and being more open to that, it might be a reasonable thing. In Europe, there's still antitrust probes to Google and Anthropic relationship. Remember, Google and Anthropic, supposedly two competing companies, share some of their cloud resources and share some of their data. This in the US is not seemingly a regulatory red flag, but in the UK, there was an antitrust probe that looks at that, and they basically asked people to comment if they think they were hurt by this relationship. That's a step towards a lawsuit. On the winners and losers of OpenAI, of the AI world, I'd say that the two biggest winners of the last couple of months are Google and xAI. Google released a number of products that are very popular. Notebook LM that allows you to ask questions about PDF, extremely popular, became very, very useful tool for a lot of companies that basically are getting it and not paying for it as it is right now. They started a partnership with Anthropic. That means that they get a bigger language model and big data. Essentially, they're trying to make the market something that they try to beat all the other companies and basically leave it to Amazon, Anthropic, and Google. And xAI, still a non-existing company, but with Elon Musk being a good contributor to Donald Trump, it seems like he's going to get a lot of favorable terms as soon as the administration takes over in a few months from now. The biggest losers, I would say, are Apple, Hollywood, and climate change. Apple, again, still not a big player for the size of the company and for their number of purchases about AI. It seems that they're not getting a lot of credit for that, and not a lot of products come out of that. Hollywood, after a year ago, there was a big strikes that ended with, I think, a loss for the writers, who essentially gave up all of their rights for something that they thought was good for 1 year. But as soon as AI starts writing entirely new scripts, they get nothing. Now the Guild of the Gaming Actors started a strike as well. And the same thing, I think they're also going to be big losers because their voices are already taken and they're not going to get much for it. And climate change seems to be a big loser that no one talks about right now, with people buying GPUs and amassing them all over the world. As I mentioned, in Memphis, Tennessee, 10% of the city. I think that we're starting to hear about the impact of this climate change outcome of this. I think this is going to be a big problem. I think that with that in mind, I'm on time to welcome Gary to the stage. I hope Gary is here.
I'm here.
Perfect timing. Okay, so let me introduce my friend Gary, who will talk to us about his new book. I have it here, Taming Silicon Valley, and also about some of the insight he has over the last year of essentially being deep inside the back and forth between, I think, Silicon Valley and the administrations. So Gary Marcus, a friend of mine, I think we met first over 10 or 15 years ago when his book Guitar Zero was launched. He had a nice book launch when he was still at NYU back then, and I met him there and immediately became friends. Since then, he's been running numerous companies. At least one of them sold to Uber recently, Geometric AI. He's not the only one. He also had a company called Robust AI. He's a academic first, the way I see it. He spent much of his career understanding how language develops in kids, as in the best way I could imagine that is why or how do babies or kids, young kids, learn to differentiate words like went instead of goed, or braked instead of broke. What happens in our brain when this develops, which I think ties nicely to his interest in AI and in language models. He was a professor of psychology and neuroscience at NYU before he is the youngest professor emeritus I know in the world. He is also a best-selling author. He's written several books. I think that Guitar Zero is a New York Times best-selling book, but it's not the only one. He wrote the book Cluj that I love, The Birth of the Mind, The Algebraic Mind, Rebooting AI, and recently Taming Silicon Valley. He's, as I said, a serial entrepreneur. And if you don't know him from any of those things, you have surely seen him in the picture before, testifying in Congress next to Sam Altman in basically the first big hearing where AI was kind of confronted by our government, trying to understand if we should or should not regulate it. I think that the answer in the hearing was yes, and I think the book tells you not just yes, but also why and how. With that in mind, Gary, thank you for joining me and welcome.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so we have short time, so I'm gonna do rapid fire questions. First of all, let me just make sure that I understand correctly. When you say Silicon Valley, you mean tech companies, right? Like Amazon, Microsoft, they all are in the sphere of the companies that
Yeah, you're the first person to call me out on the geographical, metaphorical. Yeah, I mean them in a broad sense, the tech companies, and especially the big tech companies that I think are starting to have a kind of tech oligarchy that is increasingly running our world. And I mean, part of the point of the book was to beware the tech oligarchs, that we should organize and try to stop them. And that didn't go so well.
So let me ask you this question. Are they bad people? So you can you imagine the Silicon Valley CEOs, are they aware that they're doing bad things and they just don't care? It's because the economy works for them, or they think it's going to be better and they just don't understand?
I mean, there are different people, and one of the chapters in the book is about the decline of Silicon Valley. I think, I've met Larry and Sergey, for example, and I think they really didn't want Google to do evil, whereas I don't really trust Sam Altman. I've written about that in the book, in an article in The Guardian. I think Sam Altman projects that he wants to help humanity, but he really is interested in making deals. So there's variability. There are different people, there are different motivations. Some people have mixed motivations. So Altman probably does want to help humanity. It's just that if he's pushed to make a decision between humanity and keeping OpenAI alive, he's going to keep OpenAI alive. And a really interesting example of that is O1 is their most recent model. And they claimed that it increases bioweapons risk. I don't know if it really does, or that's just them trying to make it sound more important than it is. But the point is, they had to make a decision. We have elevated bioweapons risks by our own, internal whatever. Are we going to release this? And the choice was to release it. And what's interesting about that is I think Sam probably made that decision himself. All the people, or many of the people who might have advised otherwise, basically left the company. The board's not going to stop them, and there's nothing in the U.S. government to stop someone. So suppose right now the elevated risk is 2%, and they wrote a press release to make it sound like a big deal. And okay, but what if next time it's 3,000%? It's still just Sam's decision. And my read on his motivations is he wants to keep OpenAI alive. I don't know if you're going to get into the whole notion of diminishing returns. We should talk about it, but I think that the economics of OpenAI are actually very questionable. We should probably talk about that too. And I think that would press him to make some decisions that might not be best for humanity.
So I'm going to get that in a second question. I'm going to ask you first one question before. You said in a hearing 5 minutes for him, it seemed very friendly in Congress when you were talking to each other and so on. And he was asked the same question that you were asked, which is, should we regulate AI? Should we regulate a company? And his answers were all, yeah, you should regulate us more. So it seems that in word, he said the same thing you do. Where is the dissonance here between what he said that what actually happens?
I mean, he said that, and while he said that, I don't know if literally that moment, but roughly while he said that, it turned out that OpenAI was lobbying the EU to try to water down the AI Act. And then you mentioned in your intro, which I didn't hear all of, SB 1047 in California, and OpenAI actively opposed that. So, a lot of the things that Sam said there probably weren't 100% true. In fact, my doubts about him came afterwards when I had some prior, but in the hearing he seemed reasonable to me. And then I went back. Actually, somebody gave me a tip. He said he didn't have any equity in OpenAI, and this was actually a big moment in the hearing because it made him sound kind of like benefiting humanity, yada yada. And the senators kind of ate it up and whatever. Senator Kennedy said you should get an agent, but anyway. So he really sold this. But the truth is, he had two things. He had equity in Y Combinator, which had equity in OpenAI. So he did have a stake. And to him, it maybe didn't matter that much, but it's probably like $100 million. And if the senators had known he had $100 million of indirect equity in OpenAI, they would have interpreted things very differently. So he like cast a light, didn't give the whole truth. You know, there's other pictures from that day where we both have our hands up swearing to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. He didn't. And then it also turned out at the time that he had an investment vehicle called, I think, OpenAI Venture Fund or something like that. He owned, I think, all of it at that point. He was, I think, because of bad publicity, forced to unload that. But at the time, he owned this whole thing that was kind of parasitic. And then he's doing all of these other deals, like he's got a fusion company, and the way he's proceeding in AI is driving up the need for energy. So like he was like, I'm just doing this, you know, for health insurance and because I love it. And that it just wasn't true. And other things, you know, started to unravel too. So, you know, he said he was supportive of regulation, but it turns out that he's not really all that supportive of it and so forth.
So I'll ask you now, diminishing return. And I think those companies often say what he said. It's not the only one who basically say, yeah, regulation is important, necessary, and so on. Administration says it is. Where is the stopping? Is it lobbying? Like you said it to Congress. They said, yes, we want it. He said, like, why are we not having it?
I mean, that's part of what the book is about. And there's sort of why we don't have it now and what's going to happen going forward. So I think ultimately why we have nothing in the US is because Schumer never brought anything to the floor and ran out the clock. I don't think Schumer really wanted to have strong regulation around AI. You know, he was the Senate Majority Leader. He controlled what would come to the Senate. And he has kids who work for Amazon and Meta, and he didn't want to do it. And so he ran out the clock. He had 9 listening meetings with, you know, Elon Musk and Zuckerberg and whatever, and so forth. And then in the end, he proposed a white paper, knowing full well that a white paper is not an actual proposal before Congress, and knowing full well that things might change, that there was going to be a summer recess, that there was going to be an election, that things might change. So now, you know, there has been an election. The chance that a Trump administration, a Republican Senate, a Republican House are going to come forward to do anything meaningful to protect U.S. citizens from tech oligarchies is like basically indistinguishable from zero.
So let me ask you, I'm going to go deep into the Elon Musk-Trump kind of relationship and how you see it playing out. Before that, I want to ask you, a few years ago, when a similar kind of hearing to the one you were at happened to Mark Zuckerberg on Silicon Valley, one of the things that we felt was that senators don't know much, right? There was like a lot of those embarrassing kind of things. Do you feel that they understand?
There was the famous line, how do you make money, basically? And he said, Senator, we sell ads.
Yes.
When I was sitting next to Sam, I had already used up my challenge, Sam. I didn't want to be snide too many times or whatever. But basically, they asked Sam the same question. And his answer basically, I didn't dare say this out loud, but turned out to be, Senator, we might sell ads. It was like an echo of history, but I didn't call attention to it at the time.
But your feeling was that they understand. So back then, the image was they don't understand. Do you think they understand right now? So Schumer understands and doesn't want because his daughter works for Meta, or he is just too afraid, or?
Schumer, I haven't actually talked to him directly. I don't really know. There are some senators who really do follow what's going on. So Blumenthal really follows what's going on. There's a guy in the House, a Republican, I'm forgetting name of who went back to school to get some, you know, more education in AI. There's also a Florida congressperson, I think. I never talked to Schumer, but I did talk to a number of senators, a number of Congress people. And, you know, some of them spent a lot of time trying to get up to speed and some of them didn't. And Ted Lieu is, you know, reasonably up to speed and has a staff member who's pretty up to speed, for example. Seth Moulton has an amazing staff member. So some of these people have staff that are really trying hard to understand all of this.
Okay, so it's not complacency. This was basically what I wanted to make sure. They can
I
and they
mean,
choose not to.
it's different. Look, every senator has a whole world of things, or every congressperson has a whole world of things to think about. And some of them allocate their staff. They don't have infinite staff, so some of them allocate it around AI and really see how important it is and really want to try to get up to speed, and some don't, right?
Okay, so President Marcus takes office and regulates AI. How do you do it? How do you tame Silicon Valley?
That ain't happening. I'm legally eligible, but it won't happen in this world. The whole book, or the middle part of the book, laid out 11 different things, and that's sort of tedious to listen to. I don't want to give you all 11, but the number one thing I would do, even under Trump, is to have an AI agency, both to try to maximize the positive value of AI. Like, maybe there are some jobs that we don't really need to have humans do, or they could do more efficiently and so forth. Or what can we do with medicine and AI? There's a lot of potential. It's early days, but there's a lot, and we want to get on top of that. We don't want to fall behind other countries. There are also the political issues around China that I know you alluded to a little bit. So we want an AI agency for that reason. And then there are lots of downside risks. So there's huge problems with discrimination. I think there's huge problems with misinformation, which the current regime may not care about, but should, et cetera, et cetera. And so, we could go into more of those risks if you want. But the point is, I think that we need an agency. And then the second thing that I would say is important, actually maybe even more important, is that we need something like FDA approval if you're going to release something new and untested on a large population. So suppose that OpenAI was not exaggerating. There really was a serious bioweapons risk. Like, there should be an external board in the US made up of scientists, maybe through the agency that I talked about. The details don't, well, they matter, but I mean, there are a lot of different ways you could constitute it. But you want some agency that can say, hey, make the cost-benefit analysis here like we would ask you for a drug. So, somebody comes up with a new drug, we want to know that it's going to save more people than it's going to kill. And it should be the same thing here. So if you're saying that this is going to elevate risk of bioweapons, a significant degree, and it's also going to help people do their homework faster, like, who gets to decide that? And maybe we should, maybe the government should have some say over that.
So you imagine FDAI entity that companies
Well, I mean,
like
maybe it's the USA. Well, yeah, go ahead. But yeah.
they submit their model before it gets released. Before you release ChatGPT version 5, you have to submit it to them, and they go through the steps of verifying it, testing it, auditing, all that steps. And then when they release it, it's good for the public.
Yeah, I mean, the new AI safety agencies do a piece of that. I mean, it's still all evolving, and how it works is not totally clear, but they've got, the US agencies actually have gotten some access in advance to some things, but they have no authority. So they can look at the stuff, they can write a letter. You mentioned, by the way, one of the letters they wrote to OpenAI. Senate letters don't actually do much, right? I mean, sometimes they get information, sometimes they just make noise. So, the US AI safety agency could say, hey, we're worried about this, and OpenAI can still proceed. I mean, it's the authority to gate things that need to be gated that we really lack. Of course, like, the FDA doesn't make every decision correctly, and there are issues about, like, slowing things down. I mean, there are multiple issues, but if you have no outside authority, then someone who sees trillions of dollars dancing in their heads is going to cut corners. Like, that's just going to happen, and people might get hurt, maybe badly.
So I'll give you two counter, and I'm with you behind it. The typical two kind of arguments we hear that kind of are against that. One is it's going to give our competitors, let's say China, a leg up, and the other one is lawsuits are going to save it. I think in your hearing someone said it. Why don't lawsuits save it? What are your answers to those two arguments? China, lawsuits.
So Holly asked me about lawsuits. So on China, first thing to say is, if we were serious about that, we shouldn't have let Meta give away Llama, which I think you mentioned briefly, right? So taking a step back, I think that there's multiple approaches to AI, and I think that large language models are actually hitting a point of diminishing returns. But I've been arguing that for a few years, and a lot of recent data suggests, or at least a lot of recent rumors suggest we're actually reaching that point. So I don't think that LLMs are going to be artificial general intelligence. I don't even think they're going to be sort of like trustworthy, reliable intelligence in the sense that like a calculator is trustworthy. You type in something, you expect the answer to be right. I don't think large language models are ever going to reach that point where you could just let it rip and you don't need a human to kind of double check for stupid errors and hallucinations and so forth. But that's the AI that we have right now. If I'm wrong about that, and that does lead to AGI, we have a problem because we did just give it away to China, right? Meta put it on a silver platter pretty much. I mean, they could have figured it out anyway. Enough people talked about it, but Meta really gave it on a silver platter to China. And China has more data, and data is, one of the major rate limiting steps for this particular approach that people are using, the generative AI. And so if that's the race, then, it's kind of over. It is now basically a tie, and it will stay that way. I think the race is actually to figure out what to do after large language models, and that one's actually pretty open. And one could think, what did we learn from this adventure? So we had this adventure with GPT-4. Everybody raced around thinking GPT-5 would be imminent, and maybe it will actually never come. I don't know. These people are having a lot of trouble making it, but we had this adventure. What did we do? Well, for one thing, we didn't, in fact, control its export in any meaningful way. We also had have a CHIPS Act that prevents people from exporting chips. So now we have a whole economy, a lucrative economy of smuggling chips into China. And so interdiction didn't do anything, as far as I can tell. It made a few people rich, but it didn't actually stop China. And it encouraged China to make their own chips, which means in the long term, NVIDIA is going to have a very serious competitor from China. Maybe it takes 5 years, maybe it takes 10, but at some point, China will probably overtake NVIDIA because they're pouring so much money in it, and we have this thing. So, if they could have just bought the chips from NVIDIA, maybe they would have. But anyway, so we could learn a bunch of lessons from how we kind of navigated this case. I think it's still very open what AGI is going to be. And my joke about GPT-5 is, should we be worried about China having GPT-5 before us? Why? So they can write boilerplate letters faster than we can? Like, it's still going to hallucinate. It's still going to make boneheaded errors. If they want to plot the course of the Taiwan war that I imagine will happen at some point with GPT-5, go at it. Like, let's give them GPT-5 and have it hallucinate, enemy positions. That'd be great. So that was one of your questions. The other was
Lawsuits.
Lawsuits. So lawsuits are fine. I mean, that's part of, how America works. God only knows what happens if Gates becomes the Attorney General, and like I can't even compute all of that. But what I told Holly is that existing laws only cover so much. They were all written before AI was a thing, right? Essentially all the laws. And so sometimes they specify things in ways that probably don't really meet the current occasion. So for example, defamation. Part of what defamation is built around is intent. You have to have malice. Well, these AI systems don't have intent, but they can defame people at a very large scale and have real consequence. And existing law just doesn't help there. So there are lots of gaps in the existing law. So it's not enough. It's part of a solution to use existing laws. Now, the other side of it is, Trump is surely going to fire Lena Khan. I mean, I don't think he has yet, but he's going to appoint somebody new. She was probably the most actively trying to use the existing law to, in some way, rein in the excesses of Silicon Valley. She's going to be gone for sure, and whoever replaces her is probably not going to care. The great imponderable is Elon Musk is a little bit funny in this regard. So he has huge conflict of interest now, right? He is a company that I think they're trying to value at $40 billion or something, X.AI, which you mentioned. He doesn't want to shut down his own company, but he is also worried about AI risk. And so he's a little bit split about this. I think he does genuinely care about AI risk, but this is the man who signed the famous pause letter calling for a 6-month moratorium while he was building X.AI and buying lots of chips. So most of his actions are where his money is and not where his mouth is.
So I think in maybe in your hearing, maybe in your Substack, I read it. You had an kind of take on the Lina Khan on Section 230. You said that if we kind of take on this section, it is a good way to start the kind of create legal accountability for those companies. Explain.
Yeah, so maybe not everyone knows what Section 230 is. Section 230 was basically made so that bulletin boards back in the early days of the internet could carry people's thoughts, and the people making those bulletin boards wouldn't be responsible for them. And social media companies have ever since used that to inoculate themselves from any responsibility for what they do, even when the rules really changed. So once Facebook had newsfeed, the companies were incentivized to post things that weren't true because untrue things piss people off and get them to read them and share them and so forth. There's actually research on this by a number of studies that make it pretty clear. So we moved into this perverse incentive thing where the social media companies were encouraged to spread lies, and they continue to do so without any legal responsibility. The First Amendment, of course, says you can lie more or less as much as you want, but when you do it at that volume and you have a company that is spreading them, it's not their speech anymore, but they're spreading that speech. It's not clear that you land at a place that's desirable for society. So, I think nuanced people who think about the First Amendment think that you want to balance various costs and benefits for society. So you want people to, be able to organize and complain and so forth, but you don't want people to cause infinite harm to one another. And so, for example, in Canada, where I'm living now, there are pretty clear rules against hate speech, even though in general, there's a lot of protection for freedom of speech. So anyway, 230 basically immunizes the tech companies from anything that they say or spread or elevate on their platforms. And the question is, if somebody uses a chatbot to create a bunch of lies, deliberately or unintentionally, we could ask, are they responsible for that? And one reading of Section 230 is they do whatever the hell they want, and that it gives them blanket freedom from liability no matter what they do. For example, there's an interesting study by Elizabeth Loftus and some people at Irvine and MIT showing that you can implant fake memories with LLMs. So maybe you can do that and you get Section 230 liability. You can do essentially anything, manipulate people infinitely with no consequence. Not everybody wants it to be that way, but it's not clear from the current law. So we had discussion about that. And also there was discussion when I was at the Senate, and then there was later discussion this January. I wasn't in the room. That was the one where Zuckerberg was forced to turn around and apologize. You probably saw at least a clip of that. A lot of that one and some of my session were about 230. And in both cases, the sentiment of the room, and it was similar overlapping set of senators, was we don't want 230 to do that. We don't want 230. I mean, we think 230 is giving the tech companies too much freedom from liability. And that was bipartisan, right? And part of the reason I love the Senate meeting when I was actually in the room, and though I became disillusioned afterwards, was there was a very strong bipartisan sentiment that one of the first things we need to do is to make sure that 230 is not letting these guys get away with not quite literal murder, but close. And nothing has actually happened. And then you could ask, well, why not? If there's bipartisan support for in some way circumscribing 230, some of it might be we have disagreements about exactly what that would be and so forth. But I think really what's going on is the tech companies are huge lobbies. We have Citizen United, and so they can pour arbitrary amounts of money. And so the senators want to be on TV. I mean, some of them are sincere and some of them aren't. And some of them just want to be on TV railing against this, but they don't actually want to vote against it.
So I think I'm curious because you said that he's surely going to fire Lina Khan. I actually think that maybe it's not the case because I think half the Republicans love her and half hate her and half Democrats love her. She's like a bit of a mixed thing. And this is my question to you about the bipartisan thing. It seems that there's
love to see her stick around. I would be astounded. I mean, in particular, Silicon Valley mostly hate her. Yeah. And Silicon Valley has a larger voice than they ever did before in the new administration. Primarily channeled through Elon, and then Vivek is there now.
Peter Thiel, in a way, to JD Vance.
Sorry, and
Peter
JD
Thiel.
Vance, Peter Thiel is kind of the puppet master behind the scenes, and so like I would be astounded if Lena Khan is there, in February.
But so now I'll ask you, because you kind of alluded to Elon Musk having two minds on that and so on. It seems that Elon Musk right now is the most interesting player in this thing. He has the Doge organization. He also whispers on the ears of Donald Trump. He also has his own company. His companies, Tesla, basically also owns XAI partial. It is like a mess. He hates OpenAI himself, like personally and kind of financially. Give me predictions. What do you think is going to happen with this kind of administration when it comes to regulating, not regulating, firing, changing? How do you see it
Well,
happening?
first thing I'm going to say is somebody once said in every relationship there has to be a flower and a gardener. You can't have two flowers. So I don't think the marriage is going to last, right? I mean, Trump and Musk have two of the biggest egos on the planet. They both live in echo chambers. I just don't see how the bromance can last. Like 6 months, a year. It's not going to last 2 years. They're going to get in fights over China and I don't know what. And like they're doing great right now, but it's a honeymoon. It's not going to last. And I don't know what the play is going to be there. So one play is Musk leaves in disgust. The other play, I think that Trump has signs of dementia. And, we're both neuroscientists. We can both, see what's going on. And that Musk might try to force Trump out by having Vance do the 25th Amendment on Trump. And so I think that that's actually a very real possibility. And so like that is so much, variability just right there that like everything else is secondary to it. And I can't handicap that exactly.
Are you still talking to them? So you were there in the very kind of public thing. What happens afterwards for you?
Am I still what?
So Congress invites you. You have a very public hearing. What happened now? So it's been a year. Are they kind of still asking Gary, what should we do? Or that's it? Like they did their kind of check and then moved on? What do you think you're going to be doing in the
for
next...
many months, I got many inquiries and I did another like private briefing and I talked to various places and my phone has not been ringing that much lately. I mean, I think, there's probably maybe 3 different reasons for that. I don't know. But one reason for that is, as predicted, once the election got close enough, nobody cared about tech policy anymore, right? It's just not, I mean, it may come back to top of mind, but one dynamic that people are not in politics may not understand is when there's an election coming up, nobody wants to propose anything because anything they say will be used against them. And so you get into this period, which maybe started around April or something like that. It's not a firm cutoff date, but where people just did not want to go out on a limb making any proposal at all because it would be used against their candidate or their party or whatever. So like, I wasn't getting any more calls after that. I'm not sure anybody else was either. Maybe people just figured I've heard what Marcus had to say, and so maybe they're tired of me. And now we have a new administration, and tech policy isn't really the center yet of the conversation. It may become that way. I think that unless there's a kind of 9/11 moment where something really bad happens, like a cyber attack that's powered by AI, or 100 people are driven off a highway because a driverless car does something stupid or whatever. Until there's some fairly major moment, I don't think there's going to be that much conversation about AI. And right now, everybody's just like, well, let's look at these, appointments that Trump wants to make, and like Gates is so insane. Are we going to actually let this through or not? I mean, these Republicans are saying that, not Democrats would never let Gates through. But the Republicans are kind of divided on Gates. So like, nobody has any bandwidth at this particular moment to be talking about tech. So nobody's calling me at this moment.
But you made a prediction, so to speak, that's kind of, I think, right, that a bad outcome once will be needed in order for everyone to wake up. That's
I mean, and this has happened in other industries. So like, it took really bad things to happen in the banking industry. It took 9/11. In general, Washington is organized so nothing happens. There's a whole lot of different things having to do with lobbyists and how campaigns work and so forth, such that Washington's default is not to do anything. And that happens over and over and over again, and it's happened more and more as there's been more money because of Citizens United, et cetera. And so the default for everything is nothing. It's to have people stand in front of microphones. What was interesting about the AI stuff is they actually stayed in the room after they spoke, and I was told that's very unusual. So like the senators really sincerely wanted to understand what's going to happen. But the default, nonetheless, is to do nothing. And, you know, now that we have a incoming all Republican thing, they may actually do things. But the default has been, you know, gridlock, nothing happens, and so forth. And things only happen when something really bad happens and the public demands it. So like, will we get any regulation on driverless cars? If 1 or 2 people die here or there, no. If 100 people, maybe, or let's say 40 kids in a school bus are forced off the road by a driverless car, then maybe like the public gets mad and maybe they do something. But if people die one by one, you know, every month or two, nothing's going to happen.
Your book lays out a very kind of specific plan. It has said 11 points, and it kind of said do this, do this. What kind of happened since the book is out in terms of like you getting kind of companies or regulators calling you and saying, let's talk, what do you want to happen? And I think in a way, thinking that the audience that we have here has a lot of business people who are senior in their respective companies. What do you want them to do after this call, given what you said?
I mean, I've not gotten a lot of calls. I know some people in the Senate or the staffers have been reading the book, but I mean, like I said, all is quiet right now. The book just came out in September, and you know, everybody's has been focused on the elections. In terms of businesses, I think they should. I think there's a kind of a separate set of questions, some of which I touch on in the book. This current technology doesn't actually work that well. And I think, you know, one of the chapters in the book is about hype and how Silicon Valley basically is lying to people. I think most companies figured that out in the last several months. So I think every company in the world tried to use generative AI in the last year. And not that many of them have found cases where there's really return on investment. You know, typically what they find is the system isn't that reliable. They have to have a lot of extra human engineering to try to make it work. And, you know, the results are just not compelling enough. Now that could change, but I don't think it will change. So I think, do you know the word hopium? Kind of like hope and opium. There's like a drug of hopium that has been very popular right now. People are like, yeah, but GPT-5 will solve all this and so forth. But what has come out in the last month or so is that all the companies that thought they were going to be building GPT-5 or GPT-5 level models are getting disappointing results. And so what I think is going to happen is people are going to lose some enthusiasm, the valuations of some of these companies are going to decline and so forth. And so, you know, my first advice to companies would be just don't believe the hype. Like Sam Altman talks a really good game, but when you get down and try to actually use this stuff, does it work? Second thing would be there can be blowback. So for example, a lot of companies are using these things to make employment decisions. And it's very clear that these systems are discriminating. There may be lawsuits around that. There may be bad press around that. And so, you know, if you're a business, you have to think about, I'm adopting this technology. It does not work like a calculator. If you adopt calculators or spreadsheets into your business, there is no, you know, downside that people are going to argue at you because there was bias in your arithmetic computation, right? I mean, it just is. It's provably correct. That's not true with LLMs. When you use LLMs, these things are demonstrably biased, and you have chosen to use them, and there may be some heat around that. I mean, again, with Trump and the anti-woke and all that, like, I don't know where all that's going to land, but you are incurring some risk on your business because this stuff is unreliable. I'll give you another example in a different dimension, which is a lot of people are using these systems to write code, and programmers love them. It allows them to write faster. But there have been some studies that suggest that the code that they write is not very good. and has security problems, and it may have what we call technical debt. You write the code, it seems fine, but then when you try to fix it later, it doesn't work very well, or it's hard to fix, I guess is what I should say. And so, like, we don't really have good long-term studies. If you adopt this stuff and there is a bunch of technical debt, which seems to me to be quite plausible, then you're going to pay for it down the road.
Is there any company of the many that we know that does it that you say they're the best, like they're most kind of safe, they're kind of, because I know that, for instance, many people who left OpenAI left to supposedly start safe companies, better. And so are they gambling? Are you gambling on them doing it, or it's just like a nice flashy thing and they're basically going to be the same?
I think there's a disease that OpenAI has encountered, which is a kind of money leading to abandonment of corporate values, and Anthropic seems to be now suffering from that disease too. That was the one that was founded by OpenAI refugees. They're still, I think, on somewhat stronger moral footing than OpenAI seems to be these days, but you can see them slipping away. And also, you start to see Dario Amodei more and more making crazy, outrageous, hypey predictions like that AGI is going to be here in a couple of years or whatever, with this plausible. And like, do you know the trillion-pound baby cartoon on Twitter? I'm blanking on the guy's name who did it, but he took a picture of his kid just after his kid was born. And then he did this as a joke. And then he took a picture of his kid a month later and he said, look, my kid was, has doubled in weight in the first month. By the time he's in college, he's going to be 1 trillion pounds. So, this is the peril of, assuming an exponential is going to continue indefinitely, right? And Dario is doing that like left and right now. And, Sam was doing that for a while. I think like you need another $10 billion in chips in order to try the next thing. You start saying stuff like that. Your ethical fiber erodes.
2 last questions I have. One is, I asked it every person I spoke to, how do you keep updated? The space of AI is moving so fast, new algorithms, how do you personally kind of keep your fingers on the pulse on companies, what they say, and who the functionality out there and so on?
I mean, I think it's impossible at this point. I read pretty broadly. I don't have any leisure time anymore. Like, since ChatGPT came out, like, I've read like, 2 novels or something like that. So like, there is no magic solution there. I mean, I guess in a certain way I'm privileged, which is people send me stuff. And so I don't even ask, but I sort of have like a network of spies now. And people are like, did you see this? Did you see that? And in fact, every morning I wake up and people have sent me 5 things and asking my opinion about it. So, some of it is I have other people that are selecting things that they think will be interesting to me. And that just comes with time. I remember being really honored when Chomsky explicitly asked me to do that for him in child language development. And now I'm sort of on the other side of it. I'm more senior now that people are feeding me stuff. So there's that. I mean, until recently, like until yesterday, I was using Twitter. I've just become too disgusted with the place, or X. And I'm unclear whether I will continue to use it. But people post things on social media that are interesting and so forth. I don't think it is humanly possible anymore to keep up with all of it. I guess the other thing is one has to be ruthless and look at an abstract, for example, and say, is there likely to be content here, and not read further? If not, like, if the abstract doesn't make sense, the article's not going to make sense. So, I'm somewhat ruthless in that way, like just self-protective. Like, one has to really carefully use one's time in order to keep up. And even still, like, there was a point at which I thought I really knew all the important things, even though I didn't know everything. And I don't think that that's true anymore. I just don't.
My, I guess, last question to you is, what's next? So you have this book that came out. You, this year, kind of became, I think, the voice of the people when it comes to AI regulation from the hearing and onward. I think I've not spent a week without seeing you somewhere on one of the networks advocating for this thing.
I did Fox yesterday, Fox TV, Fox News.
There it is. What's next?
It might be another startup. I'm not 100% sure. I need a little bit of a break. It's been a very intense, basically 2 years since ChatGPT came out. Like, I've been making the same kinds of, as you know, same kinds of analyses about neural networks all the way literally back to my dissertation, which was in the 90s. And I always had, an audience. I could always find people who were interested in hearing what I had to say. But that qualitatively changed when ChatGPT came out. Then, like, I was in the media really, like, all the time. And it's been exhausting. And I think, like, it's been basically 2 years nonstop. I think I anticipated that there would be diminishing returns. I think the world is finally seeing that. Maybe that's a good time for me to take a break. I feel vindicated. Not everybody's giving me credit, but I was certainly there. And maybe that's a good pause point for a while. Maybe I will work on some AI of a different description, large language models.
Write a novel.
Models are a component, but I'm not going to throw them away. But I think that there are a lot of things left unexplored in the space of possible models of AI, and I might go explore some of that.
It's time to write your novel. You only read 2 a year, and now you can have a third. That's
There's
yours.
an old joke about a dean, if I can tell it very quickly. One dean says to the other, "I'm about to retire." And the other says, "Yeah, what are you going to do?" And he says, "I'm going to finish my book." And the other dean says, "I didn't know you were writing a book." And they say, No, I'm going to finish reading a book.
Yes.
I'm feeling like that.
I'll say to the viewers, if you want to know more about Gary's viewpoint, he has a fantastic Substack. And I think that even though he's modest, he's writing quite a few articles very, very frequently. You can find a lot of updates. That's my abstract. That's my updates about what's happening in the world, including a recent one that I read about his view on the fact that what we call diminishing returns, on the fact that the large language models maybe have reached their size, their limit size. Like, it's no longer a benefit to kind of keep getting bigger and bigger. They don't give you as much outcome as you want. I think that my prediction is that it's not over for Gary also on the regulation side. You're going to hear from him on the picket fences when the Trump administration makes the wrong decisions, and he's called on to help. Gary, thank you so much for spending this time.
It was really fun.
Sharing
Great
with us.
seeing you.
And I hope that we're going to see you in person in a few weeks, months, in a session that will be even longer, even more intimate, and will allow the people here and others to hear more from you at Columbia in the next couple of weeks, months. Thank you very much.
See you again somewhere soon. Take care.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As always, the slides from today are going to be available for you, so you can dive deeper into all the little nuggets there, the predictions we have for the next 3 months. And as I imagine, the next 2 months as well are going to be very interesting with the new administration. A lot of updates and changes are going to happen. So we'll see you again in February 13 for the quarterly update. And as I said, in January for the Ask Me Anything session, where you can just show up to a Zoom call. We're going to give you a link, and you can just ask anything you want to ask and talk about everything. Thank you, as always, for joining us, and see you in a few months.